Hi, my name is Nancy Caruso, and I am a marine biologist and founder of Get Inspired. Our mission is to inspire stewardship and curiosity for the natural world through the exploration of science. We do ocean restoration projects here in Orange County, restoring our coast and involving our community. We're restoring white sea bass, green abalone, and pismo clams, and we've already restored the kelp forests after being gone for more than 25 years. The Kelp Forest Restoration Project started in 2002 and sought to restore this vital habitat along our coast in which 800 different species lived. So I trained 287 volunteer divers to help me plant the kelp and 5,000 kids to grow it in their classrooms. We planted it in the ocean, and after 10 years of hard work, we were able to restore these very important ecosystems off of our coast in Orange County. Next, we started restoring white sea bass. In cooperation with Hub SeaWorld Research Institute, we teach students to grow white sea bass in their classrooms and then release them off of the coast twice a year, in December and in June. That project is still ongoing. In addition, we're restoring green abalone. Abalone used to be very plentiful along our coast, but now are very difficult to find, and people under the age of 40 don't even know what they are. So we're teaching students about abalone, about kelp forest ecology, and about abalone anatomy and reproduction, and training them to take care of them in their classrooms. And then volunteers are helping to plant them in the ocean as well. And lastly, we're working on restoring the pismo clam population in Orange County. Once abundant and plentiful, you could see families out on the coast in the sandy areas of Newport and Huntington clamming on a nice low tide day, like this lady in the picture. Unfortunately, she took too many, and we have very little clams left here in Orange County. So we're working on identifying how many are left in the population and if they're still reproducing, and also how to reproduce them. We've been the first in the world to ever reproduce the pismo clam. So all that's going on here in Orange County, but I took a break during the month of December to volunteer for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They take volunteers for all sorts of jobs around the country, and this one was to go to Midway Atoll to count albatross nests. I promote volunteerism because most of my projects are done with volunteers, so I know how important they are to getting things done. So let's talk about Midway. What an amazing place. It's not only a national wildlife refuge, but it's also a national memorial and a national marine monument. So what is an atoll? Well, an atoll is a ring-shaped coral reef that forms as an old volcano erodes. You can see in this diagram that, like the Big Island of Hawaii, for instance, volcanoes that are submerged underwater will erupt, create an island, and then over time that island sinks, leaving just a small piece of land in the center of that ring as coral reefs grow around it. And as the island or the barrier reef builds up around that old volcano, you're left with just an island in the center and a coral reef, and then an atoll once the island in the center finally submerges. So Midway is one of the oldest in the Hawaiian island chain, being over 30 million years old, and so it has a reef, but it's 4 miles away from the island itself. It is literally sinking as we speak. It's right midway, as you would guess, between the United States and Asia, and it is an unincorporated territory in the United States of America. It is also part of a national marine monument, part of the largest in the United States of America, part of the largest in the world, and it was actually increased in size by President Obama. So you can see on these maps that the main Hawaiian islands are located in the bottom right-hand corner, including Maui and the Big Island and Oahu and Kauai, whereas the northwest Hawaiian islands extend far to the north to 28 degrees latitude, with the northest being Kure Atoll, and then right below that is Midway Atoll. So it's pretty far north, and it's been moving north on the Pacific Plate as the Hawaiian Islands have been formed over the last 65 million years. The island, the atoll itself rather, is 30 million years old, and this is a satellite view of what it looks like now. As you can see, there's very little land left with the fringing reef all the way around it, and it's about 4 miles away from where I was staying on the island. The island is composed of actually 2 different pieces of land, Sand Island and Eastern Island, and this is actually an old image of satellite view where Spit Island is now connected to Eastern Island due to a storm that put a sandbar in between. So it's changing very rapidly. As you can see, this is the most up-to-date satellite image, and constantly the ocean is at work changing the dynamics of this interesting atoll. Here's another view of the atoll from a plane, and you can see the reef along the outside, and you see the trees in the center of the island, and also a notable airstrip, which we'll get back to. So the history of Midway Atoll goes back to early 1900s when Theodore Roosevelt, our president, noted that there was lots of pilfering going on this island. As you can see in this picture, people were coming to Midway to take albatross eggs. Yes, there were albatross there back in the 1900s. And albatross eggs are large, about 4.5 inches in length, and therefore contain a lot of egg white, which at that time was used to develop photographs. The albumin in the eggs was used for photography. And so being such a large egg, these had a lot of value to be able to develop photos in the area of photography. So that same year, President Theodore Roosevelt took control of Midway Atoll for the United States and also established the Midway Cable Company on the island. This company set up the first telegraph across the Pacific, in which Theodore Roosevelt also sent the first telegraph around the world, the first message to travel around the world, which took 9 minutes. And this is a picture of that telegraph company and its buildings on Midway at that time. Tourism came just a bit later when Pan American Airways started flying the seaplane to Midway Atoll to give people a little break and relaxation on a very remote island. They set up the Gooneeville Lodge, which were nice quarters for tourists to stay in, and had nice woodies to drive people around on the island. It was quite apparently a decadent place with white glove service and not to be missed by people who could afford to head out there into the middle of the Pacific. Of course, we're all familiar with the Battle of Midway, which took place in June of 1942, but the military started building up Midway Atoll in March of 1940 because we knew something was brewing in the Pacific and we wanted to be ready for it when it happened. That battle, of course, was a turning point in World War II and likely led to the winning of the war. Later, antennas and radar were installed on the island in the Cold War to help the U.S. in its battle against Russia. And in 1969, Nixon and the South Vietnamese president met on Midway, had secret meetings about the Vietnamese or Vietnam War. In October 1978, a naval air station was redesignated a naval air facility, and 5,000 people lived there during that time, during the Cold War, with a school, a PX, gym, stores, a theater. It was a real city at that point. In 1996, the Department of Defense transferred power to the Department of the Interior, and they called it trading guns for Goonies. At that point, the island was made a national wildlife refuge. Tourism then took over, as the plan was then to have tourism pay for running the National Wildlife Refuge. They had tourism from 1996 to 2002, and they abruptly stopped that in 2002, and now tourism is not permitted whatsoever on the island. So even if you were to come there on a sailboat, they wouldn't let you come on land unless it was an emergency. It is a very well protected area, and they don't want to bring in any invasive species, so they do not allow boats to land there. So the goal of the National Wildlife Refuge is to maintain and restore natural biodiversity, provide conservation and management opportunities for scientific research and environmental education, and of course maintain historical significance and provide compatible activities to visiting public. And also the runway. I mentioned the runway before, but Midway Atoll has an active runway for emergencies for any plane that is traveling across the Pacific Ocean. And it is actually used regularly. At least once a year, there's usually an emergency where a commercial airline needs to land for some reason or another, and they are equipped to handle that with a 24-hour-a-day airport manager and firefighter who work there on the island 365 days a year to be able to handle those emergencies. But I went there to help the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with Albatross. Albatross are known as the sentinels of the sea. They actually mirror what's going on in the ocean because they spend most of their lives in the ocean. Here you can see 1.5 million of them that stay on the island during their nesting season. They're also known as Goonie birds. If you remember from the early Rescuers movie from Disney, this quacky albatross named Orville was known for his clumsy takeoffs and landings, and that's where they get the name Goonie bird, because they are kind of clumsy since they only come to land once a year to lay their eggs and nest. Albatross are the largest flying birds with wingspans up to 12 feet. They occur in the Southern Ocean and the North Pacific only, already extinct in the Atlantic. They nest on remote oceanic islands, and together there's 22 species, but all of them are listed near threatened to critically endangered. And you can see a picture of this albatross in this gentleman's hands to see next to a human just how big they are. They only come ashore to nest and rear their young and spend the rest of their lives at sea. Albatross are very long-lived, up to 70 years old they can live. We know that Wisdom is over 70 years old. She's a famous albatross that was tagged, and we know her age because of her continuous showing up on Midway and the tag that they have given her when she was born. So albatross may not begin breeding until at least the age of 5. Usually 8 years old, 7 to 8 years old, and they have only one chick. They only lay one egg each breeding season. So this makes them slow to recover from declines caused by anthropogenic or natural changes in the environment. And because they spend their life at sea, they really reflect what's going on in the ocean. So if there's a problem, if there's pollution, if there's something happening in the ocean with declines in the food chain, that's going to be reflected in the population of the albatross. So that is one of the reasons why they keep such close counts on these animals when they come back, and how many are coming back, and of course how many nests they're building each year. Albatross actually mate for life, and so about 5 or 6 years old they learn to do a dance with 26 to 45 dance moves. They pick a mate that dances very well, and they mate for life. They incubate eggs for 65 days and feed their chicks for 30 days or more, trading off, and then they both leave and come back to the nest periodically. So picking a mate is really important. That's why this elaborate dance is created, so that they can kind of prove their commitment to one another, learning to dance and being able to dance together. And when they leave the island to go out to sea before they come back and nest again, they don't do it together. So when they come back to the island, they find one another from being able to talk to one another, recognize each other's dances and voices. So their instincts are really, really high. That internal, what we don't understand about animals is how they know things. And in the albatross, there's many of those instances. They usually nest close to where the female was born. Within just about 10 meters of where she was born, she'll nest there again, which is incredible. And again, they only see each other during breeding. So the male and female will just go out to sea, and they won't see each other until the next year or the next breeding season, when they come back, find each other, and get reacquainted. And they have, as I mentioned, they have this elaborate dance. I'm going to show you this little video I took of them. They were dancing all over the island, and I could sit for hours and watch them. Incredible. There are threats to albatross, of course. That's why they're nearly threatened and endangered. On the island, the threats included mice and rats. Rats had already been eradicated, but they were introduced species. Rats were eradicated in 2005, and they just had a failed attempt to eradicate the mice. But as you can see in the left bottom corner, the picture there, rats were known to actually eat the birds alive. And again, that instinct is so strong to sit on their nest, they wouldn't get up as the rats climbed on them and began eating away at their flesh while they sat on their nest. Just an amazing instinct. Pollution is also a problem for albatross. They ingest plastic out at sea. They ingest, excuse me, they ingest plastic because flying fish lay their eggs on the plastic, and they eat flying fish eggs. They ingest plastic that looks like their prey, which is squid, and so that pollution could also play a role in their death. If they get too full and they don't want to eat anything because they feel satiated, or of course if there's an adherence of some sort of chemical to those plastics that can poison them. Overfishing of their food source, again, as I said, they do eat squid, and so overfishing of squid or decline in the squid population could cause a decline in the albatross population. And longline fishing actually has an effect on their population because they bait those long lines with their prey. The squid are on the surface, or fish are on the surface, and that's an easy meal for an albatross if they see something floating on the surface. So they often go down and bite that prey and then be impaled by a hook. Now here in the US and in Mexico, we have instituted some laws to make those lines sink so that they are not floating on the surface, and the albatross then are not attracted to that prey just floating on the surface with the hooks. So here we're taking measures to try to protect them, but that is not the case around their entire feeding area in the North Pacific. Now, looking at this map, you'll see that Midway is actually located right in the center of the giant Pacific garbage patch, right there. So it is going to be really the area in which the birds are feeding. When they leave Midway, they're flying up to the Aleutian Islands, they're flying up to the Bering Sea to feed, and then they're turning around to come back, and they're flying through this giant Pacific gyre, or the giant Pacific garbage patch. So that plastic that's floating around out there that we've always heard about is in their path while they're feeding. So this is a danger to them, of course. And they bring that plastic back and they regurgitate it to their young, which is also a problem for the same reasons. Now on Midway, there are 3 different species of albatross: the laysan, the black-footed, and the short-tailed. The laysan, actually 70% of the breeding population is there on Midway, 33% of the black-footed population, and there are now 5 short-tailed albatross on Midway. One was born while I was there. The world's largest colony of nesting laysan albatross is on Midway, which is very, very cool. And that's one of the reasons why this place is studied. There's a little chick there in the photo. Laysan albatross range is across the North Pacific from the latitude of Costa Rica to the Aleutian Islands and the southern Bering Sea. And again, they tend to forage in the colder, food-rich region of the North Pacific up here, where there's lots of activity in the food web. They also nest on some other Hawaiian Islands and the larger islands of Kauai and Oahu, and a few sites off of Mexico and Japan. Midway albatross feed off of BC and Alaska, whereas the other albatross may feed in other areas. And I'll get to that a little bit later. They nest from November to January. So they returned back to Midway to nest in November, start mating, doing their dances, and then the chicks hatch in January. You can see the size of the Laysan right now is in this photo 6.5 feet wingspan. So they are dynamic gliders. They're effortless at staying in the air because they have these big wings, essentially gliders, to keep them up in the gliding right above the surface of the ocean and up higher without really having to flap their wings very often. Now they do land on the surface of the water, but they don't land on land per se until they're ready to come back for either to begin dancing and reproducing at the age of 8, or when they come back every year in November to nest. Now they can take a year off in between laying eggs. They don't have to do it every year. Eggs are 4.5 inches long by about 3 inches wide. There's my foot next to an egg. You can see it's about half of the length of my foot. And I saw a broken open yolk there. That yolk is about the size of a credit card, just to give you some perspective. It's a giant scrambled egg if you were to use that to make eggs. This is a black-footed albatross. I think very beautiful. It was my favorite. And there's about 25,000 of the black-footed albatross. And they also have a dance, a little bit different than the Laysan albatross, with 46 different moves. This is a black-footed albatross sitting on its nest, and didn't really like me being that close to it. Now the albatross don't have any predators, and so they're not really scared of humans, but they are sitting on a nest to protect their chick, and we were very close to them all the time. Some of them did mind, but most of them did not, that we were walking by. I would have to say the black-footed albatross were probably more annoyed than the Laysan for sure when we would walk by their nests. And as I mentioned, there's now 5 short-tailed albatross on Midway. They're found in the Western Pacific. Almost all of them are in Japan and China, and almost all of them were wiped out by a volcano on the Torishima Island. And so Midway biologists made a big effort to try to attract them to Midway. And I'll show you here shortly how they did that, because they're trying to help reestablish the population. Now these are a little bit larger. They're a foot wider than the Laysan and the black-footed albatross, with that bubblegum pink beak and the golden yellow head. There's the chick. As I said, one was born while I was there, so this was a really notable event. And as you can see in this photo, they actually put out decoys to make the short-tailed albatross think they weren't the only ones there, to attract some that might be flying by. And they also played their calls over a loudspeaker on the island to attract them when they flew by, to say, hey, we're here, you can come too. As I mentioned, there's no predators, so here's a Laysan albatross sitting on its nest, and I took a picture with it because they're not afraid of us. I wanted to show that they don't run away. They were very at ease having somebody around. And I was even helping them build their nest. I'd sit down and listen to them and talk to them, and they talk to their eggs. So I loved to just sit down and watch them tend to their eggs and move their egg and stand up and aerate the egg. And so here I'm giving this albatross some grass to put on her nest as she's sitting there tending to her baby. So incubating the eggs, the mates actually trade off, and they can be gone for up to 3 weeks. So the male, for instance, will go and eat in the North Pacific for 3 weeks, traveling over 1,000 miles to feed. He'll come back and actually have to push the female off the nest. Again, that instinct is so strong to want to sit on that nest. He'll have to kind of, I saw it take more than an hour and a half for him to like, okay, it's time to go now. It's time to go now. You got to get off that nest. And finally, he'll just kind of butter off, and then she'll take off and go feed for up to 3 weeks as well. So they're taking turns tending to this very labor-intensive chick. And you might be wondering, well, how do you count all these birds? We counted over 500,000 birds on nests, and we counted every single one. So in this photo, you can see some birds walking around. You can see some birds sitting on nests, and you see us bird counters standing in a straight line, walking together across this field, counting, looking one direction at the other person's feet and counting all the nests in between myself and the person next to me. So here's a little video of what that looks like. And you might notice the shoes we have on. Those are actually snowshoes because the island is also covered with 2.4 million bone-in petrels, and they burrow in the ground. So we were trying not to fall in the holes created by the burrowing petrels. Now, this census takes place every year for 3 weeks from the end of November into December, and it's conducted all by volunteers. It started in 1991, so it's really something. I mean, it's a really unique to have such a long-term data set, one that is done every year and accounting every single nest. So we divided up the island into sectors. This is some examples of what that looks like. And then we'd use, of course, waypoints to get ourselves into the right sectors and know when they start, know where they end. We know their boundaries. We also marked them with painted rocks and markers. We counted them using tallies. So we have 2 different species, so we had 2 different tally counters. And as I said, we counted over 500,000 nests. Now, the birds hatched after I left, so I didn't get a chance to see them hatch, but they usually start hatching right on January 18th. Unfortunately, I left on the 10th of January, so I didn't get to see them, but I know they did hatch. I heard from the friends of the Midway Atoll that indeed they did start hatching on January 18th, and they hatch from in January, and they start fledging in June and July. So again, their parents take turns feeding them, and then parents start leaving simultaneously and coming back and feeding them. And then starting in about June or July, they start to fledge. And this is the period of what they look like. Up in the upper left there, they look like a black fuzzball, and then they start to molt and get rid of those down feathers. And by the time they're ready to take off and fledge, they've kind of eliminated those down feathers, and they've got real feathers for flight. This one's still got like a mohawk of his down on his head. But interestingly enough, there is another migration that takes place when they start to fledge to take advantage of those birds that don't quite know how to fly yet. That's tiger sharks. So tiger sharks come in June and July, and they'll catch the birds who don't quite make it off of the island into the air and maybe fall in the water and need to recover. The tiger sharks are there to take a bite. There's other birds on Midway as well. One of them is the canary. That one's there year-round. It was actually released by some of those residents that lived there during the Cold War, and now I believe it's a whole new subspecies of canary that lives on Midway that resides there year-round. The rest kind of nest or rest there, and that includes the golden plover, the white tern, the bristle-thighed curlew, the bone-in petrel, and I'll get back to this one, the Laysan duck. It is a permanent resident on the island as well. It is the most endangered duck in the world. They were translocated there for a project under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're actually reproducing and doing quite well on the island. And interestingly enough, because Midway is sinking, it is eventually going to succumb to, the erosion effects and also rising sea levels. They're trying to translocate Albatross perhaps to some places that are going to be able to withstand those changing climates and the changing latitudes as the Pacific Plate continues to move. So while we were there, the Pacific Rim Conservation Group, it's a nonprofit organization, came and picked up black-footed albatross eggs to translocate them to Guadalupe Island. And Guadalupe is off the coast of Baja, Mexico, and they actually have now a resident population of about 1,500 albatross, which is amazing. They have a very high success rate of hatching and of fledging because the California current is right off of Guadalupe Island, and the birds can just fly one day out into the California current, feed, and come back and feed their chicks and trade off on the nest. So it's a lot less energy that they're using to feed themselves, and they can feed their chicks a lot more often, so the chicks have a faster growth rate and have a faster or a better success rate at making it to fledging. There's also a translocation on Oahu and Kauai, and you can read about that on those islands as well by the Pacific Rim Conservation Organization. There's some other projects on Midway. They tried mouse eradication. They got rid of the rats, as I said, in 2005, but they tried mouse eradication, and that was this year. They actually did it. It was a huge event. It took a whole lot of planning and a whole lot of money, $10 million to be precise, and unfortunately it failed. There were still mice there when I was there, really small mice. They're like 2 inches long, but there was no signs of them feeding on the albatross, which is good. So that means there's probably enough food on the island for them to eat, and they don't have to prey on the heads of birds. The restoration of native plants and removal of non-native plants is a continuous project on Midway, and there isn't any underwater work going on. The monitoring of the reefs there is not really on a consistent basis. I did get to go in the water a couple of times when the visibility was good enough. I did see some beautiful fish. There isn't any coral inside the lagoon, and actually the coral reefs are about 4 miles away from the land, and they're actually above sea level because the island is so old and sea levels were higher at that time. So there's old coral reef and then a new coral reef underneath, but there's very little coral growth because of the latitude at 28 degrees. It's really the northern latitude where corals can grow. The short-tailed albatross is another one of those projects. They're trying to attract more of them. It's an critically endangered species, so they're trying to attract more to the island to help boost their populations. The Laysan duck, as I mentioned, is doing quite well on the island. And interestingly, they're starting to attach transmitters to the albatross, being that they spend their whole life out in the ocean. They're going to use the birds as kind of spies on the water because nobody's allowed to be fishing within the marine sanctuary, and yet illegal fishing is going on, and there really isn't a way to patrol that. So they set up these transmitters on the albatross to be able to pick up radar whenever they fly over a boat that has radar. And then when the bird comes back, they can download that information and see how many boats were illegally fishing in the marine sanctuary. And then they're hoping to be able to get to the point where they can upload that data immediately to a satellite and see if there are boats in the area live when the albatross is flying over. So that is in the process. They're testing that out this year, which I think was really interesting. Now, everybody's heard about plastic on Midway, and there was lots of plastic. This was actually a plastic pile that we put together, not just while I was there, but the people who stay and work and volunteer on Midway are constantly doing beach cleanups, and they put all of the trash that they collect into a pile, which then gets picked up once a year by a NOAA boat, or actually it's a nonprofit boat that comes by and picks up the trash. So this is trash that's been collected by the people who stay, live, and intern there. And then here's a picture of trash after a storm in one of the corners of the harbor. So you can see the things that wash up, like fishing lines and boat lines and baskets from fishing boats, a lot of fishing debris that comes up on shore. This is a little video that I took on the northwestern point of the island, and it shows a lot of fishing buoys that you can see, and exemplifies as I'm walking down the beach. So you can see the plastics, these different types of plastic, large and small, and then also the fact that when you get down and into the sand, you see the small pieces that have been broken down, and then you get down low and start looking at the small stuff away, and you see the bottle caps, the remnants of plastic. There's a shoe. The little stuff that never goes away. There's treasures too. I actually found a glass float when I was there. If you're not familiar, these glass floats were used in the early 1900s until the 1960s when we didn't have plastic for fishing nets. And they're still floating around in the Pacific, and every once in a while they wash up on shore somewhere in Alaska or on the Vizcaino Peninsula in Baja. And if you're lucky enough, you might just find one. Well, I found one. Very lucky to have found one of these treasures. So plastic is an issue. And here in the top left, you can see I found a bolus one day. This is a regurgitated mass that the albatross kind of coughs up like an owl pellet. The things that they cannot digest. I did, of course, dissect it. There's a lot of squid beaks in there, but there was a lot of pieces of plastic, and you can see plastic netting. Here, this was around a nest, and the number one plastic that was around nests were lighters, believe it or not, where the albatross goes out and picks up lighters in the ocean, regurgitates them to their chicks, so they were laying all around the nests. And this is actually a dead albatross that I came across, the only one that I came across that I found plastic in its gut, where it just decomposed right there, and there's a toothbrush laying in its gut with also pieces of plastic in here as well. So the way the plastic kills an albatross is not simply by ingestion, because they can cough it back up again. But if it perforates their inner organs, of course, that can cause them to die. If it's carrying any, adhering any toxins to it, or if it fills them up to the point where they don't want to eat, these three issues are what cause the albatross to die from plastic. So what is it like to be a bird counter? You can see we have these, as I said, the snowshoes on our feet. We get up in the morning, breakfast, we count from 8 to 11, we have lunch, we go back out and count, then we eat dinner. We work 6 days a week. We had Sundays off. They also gave us Christmas Day and New Year's Day off, which was nice. There's just one place that has Wi-Fi, and you can make phone calls on the island. We work in all weather conditions, wind, rain, and so that you have to be prepared for that. But you have to go during the holidays, because that's when the birds are there nesting. So December 1st through January 10th is the shortest period that you can go to volunteer. And you need to be in really great physical condition. I can attest to that, where you've got to wear these shoes, walking through really kind of uneven habitat, and walking 6 to 10 miles a day. On a 2.5 square mile island, I walked 196 miles, just to give you an idea of how much walking we're doing. And how to apply. You can apply through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's a link here. They have opportunities all over the country, including in all 50 states, in the Aleutian Islands, the Pribilof Islands, to help with their projects. So I highly recommend this opportunity, especially if you're a retired person and you can go at any time. I'm working, so I had to take off from work to go, and there were 2 other people that did the same thing. So that requires a little bit more planning. But you had to, in order to go to Midway, you had to have medical evacuation insurance, because there is no hospital there. You had to have a current passport, and the application process begins January, ends in May. You do have to apply with a cover letter, a resume, and have some references to say that you know what you're getting yourself into, because once you get there, there's no way to get home. The plane only comes twice a month, and all the seats are already accounted for. So once you get there, you got to work. And so they want to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. So there we go. That's the end, with a little chick sticking out from under the wing of a mother albatross. I hope that you have learned something about these beautiful birds. My takeaway from the whole experience was, one, to be in a very remote location, to see this beautiful place that is being basically taken back over again by nature. It had been kind of destroyed in a way by man. We paved over it, built houses on it, and a lot of those structures have been taken down now, and nature is taking over the island again. And that always amazes me, the resiliency that nature has. And to also get to be the friend of an albatross. I really feel like I got to know them. I studied them, I observed them, I sat down next to them and listened to them and took their photos. And so I really appreciated the opportunity to go there and experience this firsthand. Of course, there's also monk seals on the island. There's green sea turtles on the island. I actually got to see a manta ray on the one day that I got to go snorkeling in the harbor there. And so it was an amazing experience, a beautiful place. And I highly recommend that you look into volunteer opportunities of any sort, because this country relies on volunteers to get great work done in all sorts of settings. And so if you are interested in contacting me, here is my contact info. And thank you so much for listening. And I hope to see you sometime soon in the field.